The air in the makeshift bar at FOB Black Ridge tasted of stale beer, sweat, and fine, ever-present dust. It was a taste Sergeant Anya Sharma had become accustomed to over the past week, a flavor of isolation and simmering aggression. She sat alone at a splintered wooden table in the corner, nursing a bottle of water, the amber glow of the single string of lights glinting off the condensation. Her posture was relaxed, a study in deliberate stillness that the other occupants of the crowded tent misinterpreted as weakness. To them, she was a ghost, a logistics NCO who had appeared on the manifest with no warning, assigned to the motor pool to untangle a snarled supply chain. She was small-framed, her face etched with lines that spoke of sun and sleepless nights rather than age, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, regulation bun. She moved quietly, spoke only when necessary, and performed her duties with an unnerving efficiency that bordered on robotic. In a place where bravado was currency, her quiet competence was seen as an oddity, an unwelcome deviation from the norm. Across the room, Corporal Davis was holding court. He was a big man, his neck thick and his arms corded with the kind of muscle built by hauling machine guns up scree-covered slopes. He and his fire team, fresh from a patrol, were loud, drunk, and territorial. His eyes, bleary and bloodshot, kept snagging on Sharma. "Look at her," he slurred to his companion, a wiry private named Chun. "Just sitting there, probably counting bolts in her head. What's a paper pusher even doing in here? This is a grunt's place." Chun shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "Leave it, man. She's just having a drink. It's water." "Chun," Davis sneered, his voice rising in volume, drawing more attention. "Water. We're out there humping it, taking chances, and she's in here hydrating. It ain't right." He pushed himself up from his stool, the legs scraping against the plywood floor. The low murmur of conversations in the tent began to falter as he lumbered toward Sharma's table. He planted his meaty hands on the surface, leaning in, his breath a foul wave of cheap whiskey and chewing tobacco. "Problem, Sergeant?" he asked, the rank a deliberate insult. Sharma didn't look up from her water bottle immediately. She took a slow, deliberate sip, placed it back on the table with a soft click, and then raised her eyes to meet his. Her gaze was flat, unreadable. "No problem, Corporal." Her calmness seemed to enrage him further. It was a rejection of the hierarchy he understood, the one of physical intimidation and audible threats. "I think there is," he pressed, leaning closer. "I think the problem is you're in the wrong damn tent. The REMF shack is 2 clicks that way. This place is for people who pull triggers, who get their hands dirty." A few of his friends snickered. Others in the bar shifted, some looking away, a few watching with predatory interest. This was the theater of the FOB, and a new drama was unfolding. "I'm authorized to be here, same as you," Sharma said, her voice even, devoid of any tremor of fear or anger. It was this absolute lack of emotional response that was so infuriating to a man like Davis. He needed a reaction, a spark of fear to validate his dominance. "Authorized." He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Authorization don't mean a damn thing. This is about respect. Something you haven't earned." He jabbed a thick finger toward the door. "So why don't you take your water and your tidy little paperwork and get out of here? Go on." Sharma remained seated, her hands resting on her knees beneath the table. She simply watched him, her eyes tracking his micro-expressions, the tightening of his jaw, the flare of his nostrils. She was assessing, processing, the way a meteorologist watches a storm front build. "I'm not finished with my drink, Corporal," she stated simply. That was the final straw. His face, already flushed with alcohol, turned a deep, blotchy red. The perceived disrespect, the utter refusal to bend to his will in front of his peers, was a public castration of his ego. He straightened up, his shadow falling completely over her. "I said," he growled, his voice dropping to a menacing low, "Get out." He reached down, not to grab the bottle, but to grab her arm, to physically haul her from the chair. His fingers were about to close around her bicep when her hand moved. It wasn't fast, not in a flashy way. It was just efficient. Her fingers wrapped around his wrist, not in a grip of strength, but with a precise application of pressure on the radial nerve. A jolt of sharp, electric pain shot up Davis's arm. He gasped, his eyes widening in surprise. He tried to pull back, but her grip, though it looked casual, was like a vice. "Let go of me," he snarled, a hint of panic now threading his voice. "You should leave, Davis," she said, her tone unchanged. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, a final off-ramp before a collision. Blinded by rage and humiliation, he ignored it. With his free hand, he swung. It was a clumsy, telegraphed punch, a haymaker fueled by ego and whiskey. For most people, it would have been devastating. For Sharma, it was an invitation. She didn't duck or flinch. As his fist traveled through the air, she released his wrist, simultaneously rising from her chair, not away from the blow, but into it. She moved inside the arc of his punch, her body a fluid coil of kinetic energy. Her shoulder checked his momentum. Her left hand cupped the back of his head. Her right slid under his armpit. Using his own forward motion against him, she pivoted. It was a flawless execution of a standing hip throw, a technique requiring perfect timing and leverage, not brute force. Davis's large body was lifted from the floor, his feet leaving the ground as he was spun over her hip. For a brief, suspended moment, he was airborne, a look of pure, unadulterated shock on his face. He landed on the hard-packed dirt floor with a heavy, grunting thud that shook the entire tent. The air was forced from his lungs in a pained whoosh. The bar fell into absolute, tomb-like silence. No one had ever seen anything like it. There was no brawl, no screaming, no wild exchange of blows. There was just a quiet logistics sergeant and a 220-pound infantryman gasping for breath on the floor at her feet. Sharma stood over him, not with a look of triumph, but with the detached expression of someone who had just finished a routine task, like assembling a rifle or changing a tire. She calmly straightened her uniform, picked up her water bottle from the table, and turned to leave just as the MPs burst through the tent flap, drawn by the sudden, unnatural quiet. The colonel's office was cold. The air conditioner, a luxury on FOB Black Ridge, rattled and hummed, fighting a losing battle against the oppressive heat outside. Colonel Reed sat behind a large metal desk, his face a mask of controlled fury. He was a man who believed in order, in clear lines of authority, and in the inviolable truth that a grunt was worth 10 support staff. The incident in the bar was a gross violation of that order. In front of him stood Sergeant Anya Sharma and a now-sober, deeply bruised Corporal Davis. An MP stood sentinel by the door. Reed's eyes, chips of blue ice, were fixed on Sharma. He had her file open on his desk, a thin manila folder that told him almost nothing. Anya Sharma, logistics specialist. Service record, exemplary, but sparse on details. No deployments to combat zones listed, just a series of stateside assignments and specialized training schools with vague, redacted course names. It was the file of a career paper pusher. Sergeant Sharma, Reed began, his voice low and tight, each word clipped. I have been the commander of this FOB for 18 months. In that time, we have maintained a certain standard of discipline. We are a forward operating base, not a back-alley saloon. Brawling is not tolerated. Assaulting one of my infantrymen is. He let the word hang in the air, pregnant with menace. Unthinkable. Davis shifted his weight, wincing as his bruised ribs protested. He avoided looking at Sharma. The humiliation of the previous night had been replaced by a sullen, simmering anger. Sir, Sharma said, her voice calm and respectful. Corporal Davis was intoxicated and belligerent. He threatened me and then he threw a punch. I defended myself. Reed scoffed, a small, derisive sound. You defended yourself? He tapped the file. You're a logistics NCO. He is a combat infantryman, a decorated one at that. You expect me to believe that you, got lucky? He looked at Davis. Corporal, Your report states that she provoked you, that she was disrespectful and instigated the physical altercation. Davis seized the opportunity, his voice thick with self-righteousness. Yes, sir. That's right. She was running her mouth, saying things about us grunts. I told her to show some respect, and she came at me. I was just defending myself, sir. It was a clumsy, obvious lie, but it was the lie Reed wanted to hear. To fit his worldview. The quiet, unassuming woman was the instigator. The big, loud infantryman was the victim. Sharma's expression didn't change. She didn't argue or protest. She simply stood there, a silent testament to the truth, allowing the colonel to construct his own narrative. Her silence was more unnerving to Reed than any outburst would have been. Felt like judgment. I see, Reed said, closing the file with a snap. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He had already made his decision before they had even entered the room. He couldn't punish one of his frontline soldiers, not with morale already stretched thin. The woman, the outsider, would be the example. Ordinarily, an incident like this would see you on the next flight back to Bagram with a formal reprimand that would effectively end your career, he said, his gaze boring into Sharma. But we are short-handed, so I am going to offer you an alternative. A chance to see what real soldiers do. He leaned forward, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. Tomorrow morning, Convoy Red 7 is making a supply run to Observation Post Kestrel. It's a milk run, usually, but the route has been getting spicy. My men are stretched thin, so you're going to fill a seat. You'll be the vehicle commander for the trailing MRAP. Consider it a lesson in humility, Sergeant. A reminder of your place in the food chain. It was a punishment disguised as a duty. OP Kestrel was perched in the notorious Serpent's Tooth Pass, a route so frequently targeted by insurgents that it was known colloquially as the IED Rodeo. Sending a logistics NCO with no listed combat experience on that run was, at best, grossly negligent. At worst, it was a death sentence. Davis couldn't suppress a small, triumphant smile. He would be on that convoy, too, in the lead vehicle. He would get to watch the arrogant paper pusher panic when the bullets started flying. Corporal Davis, Reed said, turning his attention. You will, of course, receive a formal letter of counseling for your part in this. Public intoxication is unbecoming of a soldier. Don't let it happen again. Dismissed. Davis threw a crisp salute. Yes, sir. He shot a venomous, victorious glare at Sharma as he walked out. Reed's attention returned to Sharma. Do you understand your assignment, Sergeant? Perfectly, sir, she replied. Her voice was as steady as ever, betraying nothing. There was no fear, no anger, no protest. Just acceptance. Good, Reed said, his tone dismissive. Don't expect any special treatment. You'll pull your weight like everyone else. Lieutenant Evans will be the convoy commander. You report to him at 0400. Get out of my office. Sharma executed a perfect about-face and walked out of the cold, sterile office into the blistering heat of the Afghan day. She didn't look back. Colonel Reed watched her go, a feeling of deep satisfaction warring with a tiny, unsettling prickle of doubt. Her composure was unnatural. It was the composure of either a fool or something far, far more dangerous. He chose to believe it was the former. It was a simpler, more comfortable truth. The pre-dawn air was cold, carrying the scent of diesel and damp earth. Under the harsh glare of the motor pool floodlights, the convoy assembled. 3 heavily armored MRAPs, hulking beasts of steel and Kevlar, idled with a low, guttural rumble. Sharma was already there when the rest of the crews arrived, moving around her assigned vehicle, the last in the line, with a methodical purpose that set her apart. She wasn't just kicking the tires. She was running her hands along the seals of the doors, checking the torque on the lug nuts, inspecting the undercarriage with a high-powered flashlight for any signs of tampering. Lieutenant Evans, a young, fresh-faced officer whose authority felt like a costume he hadn't yet grown into, watched her with a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. Sergeant Sharma, he called out, his voice a little too loud in the quiet morning. Pre-flight checks were done an hour ago. The vehicle is green. Sharma didn't stop. She pulled herself up onto the roof and began inspecting the mounts for the 50 caliber machine gun, testing the traverse and elevation mechanisms. "With respect, sir," she called down, her voice clear and carrying. "I prefer to verify for myself." Davis, who was loading ammunition cans into the lead vehicle, laughed out loud. "Let her play mechanic, L.T. Probably the most excitement she's had all month." The other soldiers chuckled along, the sound sharp and cruel in the cold air. They treated her like a contamination, a foreign object in their well-oiled machine. They gave her a wide berth, their conversations halting when she drew near. She was the colonel's punishment detail, and no one wanted to be associated with her. She ignored them all. Her focus was absolute. She checked the fluid levels, the battery connections, the integrity of the radio antennas. She opened a side compartment and inspected the medical kits, her hands moving with an unfamiliar familiarity, repacking a chest seal here, ensuring a tourniquet was properly staged there. It was the work of a seasoned combat medic, not a logistics clerk. No one noticed. Finally, she climbed into the driver's seat. The MRAP's interior smelled of sweat, oil, and fear. She ran her fingers over the comms panel, her eyes scanning the array of switches and gauges. She wasn't just looking. She was memorizing, building a schematic of the vehicle's nervous system in her mind. "All right, mount up," Evans shouted, clapping his hands together. "Comms check, then we roll." "Red 1. This is Red Leader. Over." The radio crackled to life. "Red Leader, this is Red 1. Solid copy." It was Davis's voice, smug and confident. "Red 2, copy." Evans looked toward Sharma's vehicle. "Red 3, you on the net." Sharma keyed the mic. "Red Leader, this is Red 3. 5 by 5 inch." Her voice was professional, clipped, a stark contrast to the casual chatter of the others. "Good," Evans said, sounding relieved. "Let's move out. Route is clear according to intel. Keep 50-meter spacing." Eyes open. The heavy gates of the FOB scraped open, and the convoy rolled out into the gray twilight. The road was little more than a dirt track carved into the side of a mountain, a treacherous ribbon of gravel and sand. On one side, a sheer rock face climbed into the sky. On the other, a precipitous drop into a rocky, shadowed valley. For the first hour, the journey was tense but uneventful. The sun began to crest the jagged peaks, painting the landscape in harsh shades of orange and black. The silence inside Sharma's MRAP was thick. Her gunner, a young private named Rodriguez, sat nervously in the turret, his eyes scanning the ridgelines. Her driver, Chan, the same private from the bar, kept his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He hadn't said a word to her since they mounted up. Sharma sat in the TC seat, her eyes never still. She wasn't just looking. She was reading the terrain. She noted every potential ambush point, every culvert where an IED could be hidden, every cluster of rocks that could conceal a fighter. Her gaze was analytical, cold. She saw the world not as a landscape, but as a tactical problem. Getting a weird feeling, Rodriguez's voice crackled over the internal comms. "Too quiet up here." "Stay focused," Sharma replied, her tone level. "Scan your sectors." They were entering the Serpent's Tooth Pass, a narrow, winding section of the road where the valley walls closed in. It was a natural kill box. The lead vehicle, with Davis and Lieutenant Evans, rounded a sharp, blind corner. Then the world exploded. The IED was massive. A geyser of fire, rock, and smoke erupted from beneath Davis's MRAP, lifting the 20-ton vehicle into the air as if it were a toy. It landed on its side with a deafening shriek of tortured metal, partially blocking the narrow road. The concussion wave hit Sharma's vehicle a split second later, a physical blow that rattled the teeth and shook the frame. Almost simultaneously, the high ground erupted with machine gun fire. Green tracers stitched across the sky, impacting the armor of the remaining two vehicles with loud, metallic cracks. An RPG streaked down from the ridge, a fiery comet that slammed into the engine block of the second MRAP, disabling it instantly. The radio screamed with static and a single, panicked voice. "Contact!" Contact. Ambush. Ambush. Then silence. The insurgents were using jammers. They were cut off. Inside Sharma's vehicle, chaos reigned. Chun slammed on the brakes, his face pale with shock. "What do we do, sir? What do we do?" he yelled, his training evaporating in a cloud of terror. Rodriguez was firing the 50 calories in long, uncontrolled bursts toward the ridge, more for suppression than effect. "I can't see them. They're dug in everywhere." The world outside was a maelstrom of noise and violence. The rhythmic thump of a heavy machine gun, the sharp crack of AK-47s, the terrifying whoosh of another RPG passing just overhead. The soldiers in the second vehicle were trying to dismount, but they were pinned down by a torrent of accurate, disciplined fire. Sharma didn't flinch. The explosion, the gunfire, the panic. It was as if a switch had been flipped inside her. The quiet, unassuming logistics NCO was gone. In her place was something else, something cold and immensely capable. Her movements became sharp, economical, stripped of all hesitation. "Chun, reverse. Get us behind that rock outcropping now." Her voice cut through the panic like a surgeon's scalpel. It wasn't a shout. It was a command, imbued with an authority that was absolute and undeniable. Chan, startled into action, fumbled with the gearshift and threw the heavy vehicle into reverse, tires spinning on the loose gravel. Bullets pinged off the armored glass as he maneuvered the MRAP behind a large granite boulder that offered some cover. Rodriguez, controlled bursts. Sharma ordered over the comms. 3 to 5 rounds. Target the muzzle flashes. Don't waste ammo. The wild firing from the turret immediately became more disciplined, the bursts shorter and more focused. Sharma was already moving. She grabbed the radio handset for the long-range SATCOM, bypassing the jammed local frequencies. Her fingers flew across the keypad, inputting a frequency and encryption code from memory. It wasn't a standard infantry frequency. It was something else entirely. "Anyone on this net? This is Red 3 of Convoy Red 7. We are in a complex ambush at grid coordinate 42 Sierra Echo Papa 714295. Lead and trail vehicles disabled. Heavy contact from elevated positions. Requesting immediate CAS and QRF. How copy?" Her transmission was a model of calm, professional brevity. She didn't wait for a reply. She grabbed her M4 rifle, checked the chamber, and popped the rear hatch. "Chun, lay down suppressive fire through the gun port. Rodriguez, keep their heads down. I'm going out. Going out." Chun squeaked, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You'll be cut to pieces." Sharma looked at him, and for the first time he saw what was in her eyes. It wasn't fear. It was a chilling, diamond-hard focus. An absolute certainty. "Cover me," she said. It wasn't a request. Before he could argue, she was gone, slipping out of the hatch and into the kill zone. She moved low and fast, a gray blur against the gray rocks. The air was thick with cordite and the smell of burning diesel. Bullets kicked up dust around her feet, but her path was not random. She flowed from one piece of cover to the next with an unnatural grace, an instinct for survival honed in crucibles Chun couldn't begin to imagine. She reached the overturned lead vehicle. Lieutenant Evans had been thrown from the TC's hatch and lay exposed on the road, a dark, spreading stain on his leg. Davis was trapped inside, firing his rifle through a shattered window, his face a mask of terror and rage. Sharma ignored the incoming fire. She sprinted to Evans, grabbed the drag handle on his body armor, and hauled him backward into the relative safety of the MRAP's shadow. Her hands were a blur as she exposed the wound, a femoral artery hit. Without hesitation, she pulled a tourniquet from her own kit, cinched it high and tight on his thigh, and twisted the windlass until the bleeding stopped. She worked with a detached, clinical precision, the chaos of the battle fading into a background hum. "Davis!" she yelled, her voice easily cutting through the din's status. "We're all shot to hell," he screamed back, his voice cracking. "They're everywhere. We're gonna die." "Negative," Sharma snapped, her voice like a whip. You are going to provide suppressive fire on the ridgeline to our northeast. There is a heavy machine gun nest there. Focus your fire on that position. Do you understand me? Something in her tone, the sheer, unadulterated command presence, cut through his panic. He found himself nodding, obeying without thinking. Yes, yes, Sergeant. Sharma moved to the rear of the wrecked MRAP. She unlatched a storage container that was bolted to the chassis. It looked like any other storage box, but she didn't use a key. She pressed her thumb to a small, almost invisible biometric scanner. There was a soft click, and the lid opened. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was not a set of tools or spare parts. It was a rifle, a Heckler & Koch 417 heavily modified. It was fitted with a high-powered scope, a suppressor, and a laser designator. It was the weapon of a designated marksman, a ghost who operated between the lines of conventional warfare. This was not the equipment of a logistics NCO. She pulled the rifle out, its weight familiar and comforting in her hands. She chambered a round, the sound a solid, definitive clack. She crawled to a stable firing position behind one of the MRAP's massive tires, the metal shielding her from the incoming rounds. She brought the rifle to her shoulder, her cheek finding the stock in a single, practiced motion. She looked through the scope, and the chaotic, terrifying battlefield was transformed into a series of calm, clear mathematical problems. The machine gun nest was 650 meters out. The wind was gusting from left to right at about 10 miles per hour. She adjusted the scope, a few clicks for elevation, 2 for windage. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate dropping. The world narrowed to the circular image in her scope, the crosshairs, and her target. The enemy gunner was confident, believing himself safe. He was firing in long, arrogant bursts, chewing up the landscape around the pinned-down Americans. Sharma took a breath, let half of it out, and held it. The world went silent. There was only the pressure of her finger on the trigger. She squeezed. The suppressed rifle coughed, a quiet, deadly sound lost in the roar of the battle. The recoil was a familiar push against her shoulder. Through the scope, she saw the result. A red mist erupted from the enemy gunner's head. He collapsed over his weapon, silencing it instantly. The insurgent next to him, his spotter, looked around in confusion, searching for the source of the impossible shot. Sharma had already cycled the bolt, acquired her new target, and was preparing to fire again. Breath. Hold. Squeeze. The spotter crumpled, a neat, dark hole appearing in his chest. Panic began to set in on the ridge. The insurgents had lost their key weapon and 2 men in seconds, from a shot they hadn't heard and couldn't locate. An RPG gunner popped up from behind another set of rocks, trying to get a shot off at Sharma's MRAP. He never got the chance. Sharma's third shot took him through the throat. She was a phantom, a dealer of invisible death. She moved with the rifle, shifting her position slightly after every few shots, making it impossible for them to pinpoint her. She began to systematically dismantle the ambush. She targeted leaders first, the ones giving orders, the ones with radios. Then she targeted specialized weapon systems. Her shots were not random. They were a surgical deconstruction of the enemy's will to fight. Inside the MRAP, Chun and Rodriguez watched in stunned silence, their own firing having faltered. They could see her, a small figure moving with lethal grace amidst the storm of lead, felling enemies with an inhuman precision. The corporal from the bar, the woman Colonel Reed had sent out as a punishment, was single-handedly turning the tide of a battle they had already lost. The fierce, disciplined enemy assault had dissolved into a panicked, disorganized retreat. The insurgents, having lost their leadership and their key weapons in a matter of minutes, broke contact, melting back into the mountains from whence they came. The sudden silence that fell over the Serpent's Tooth Pass was more shocking than the noise had been. It was a quiet filled with the smell of gunpowder, the ticking of cooling engines, and the groans of the wounded. The battle had lasted less than 10 minutes. Sharma didn't relax. She scanned the ridges for several more long moments, ensuring the threat was truly gone. Only then did she lower the rifle. She ejected the magazine, checked the chamber, and methodically returned the weapon to its hidden case, securing the biometric lock. She was a professional cleaning up her tools after a job well done. A voice, shaky but clear, crackled over the radio in her ear. The secure channel she had opened. "Spectre, this is Archangel. We read you. CAS is 5 minutes out. QRF is inbound. What's your status?" "Over." Sharma keyed her mic, her breathing still even, her voice betraying no hint of the carnage she had just wrought. "Archangel, this is Spectre. Threat neutralized. We have multiple casualties. Require immediate medevac. The package is secure." She rose and walked back toward the chaos. The surviving soldiers from the second vehicle were staring at her, their faces a mixture of awe, confusion, and fear. Davis had managed to crawl out of the overturned MRAP, his arm bent at an unnatural angle, his face ashen. He saw her approaching, and his jaw went slack. He had heard the transmission. He had heard the call sign. Spectre. It wasn't a common call sign. It was a name spoken in hushed, reverent tones in intelligence briefings and special operations circles. A ghost. A Tier 1 operator from the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, DevGru. The elite of the elite. A legend sent to solve problems the military didn't want to admit it had. A heavy thump-thump-thump grew in the distance, and 2 Black Hawk helicopters crested the ridge, their dark shapes stark against the morning sky. They were the quick reaction force. They weren't coming for a squad of grunts. They were coming for her. Colonel Reed arrived on the first helicopter, his face grim. He had expected to be overseeing a recovery operation, bagging the bodies of his soldiers and the arrogant NCO he had sent to her death. Instead, he found a scene of controlled, efficient triage. Sharma was directing the placement of the wounded, her voice calm and authoritative, the young soldiers obeying her without question. She moved among them, checking dressings, offering a quiet word of encouragement, her uniform stained with dirt and the blood of the men she had saved. When she saw Reed approaching, she straightened up, her expression unreadable. Reed stalked toward her, his mind struggling to process the contradictory reports he'd received. His men were alive. The ambush had been broken. And this woman, this logistics sergeant, was at the center of it all. "Sergeant," he barked, falling back on his anger as a defense against his confusion. "What in the goddamn hell just happened here? My convoy is destroyed. My lieutenant is critically wounded. I want a report now." Before Sharma could answer, a voice came over the radio of the tactical officer who had accompanied Reed. It was a secure channel patched directly through to CENTCOM. "Archangel to Colonel Reed. Stand down. I repeat, stand down. You are speaking to Spectre." Reed froze. The name hit him like a physical blow. He had heard the stories, the rumors. Spectre was a myth, a boogeyman sent to clean up the military's worst messes. Spectre was always spoken of as a he. He slowly turned his head back to Sharma. He looked at her not as a subordinate, not as a woman, but as something entirely different. He saw the lethal calm in her eyes, the economy of her movement, the quiet confidence that he had so badly misinterpreted as weakness. His entire world reoriented itself in that single, horrifying moment of clarity. She wasn't here to fix his supply chain. She was here to assess him. The bar fight, his dismissive judgment, his use of a dangerous convoy as punishment. It had all been a test he had spectacularly failed. Her mission, the voice on the radio continued, cold and impersonal, was to evaluate this FOB's command climate and combat readiness under stress. Consider today's convoy her final exam. Your final exam. The pieces clicked into place with sickening finality. The thin, sanitized file, the redacted training courses, her unnatural composure. He hadn't sent a paper pusher into a kill zone. He had sent one of the most dangerous operators on the planet on a routine patrol, and she had single-handedly saved his men from his own arrogant incompetence. The blood drained from his face. Davis, sitting nearby while a medic splinted his broken arm, had heard everything. The smugness, the anger, the resentment. It all evaporated, replaced by a profound and soul-crushing shame. He looked at Sharma, truly seeing her for the first time. He hadn't just picked a fight with a sergeant. He hadn't just punched a woman. He had assaulted a living legend. He had tried to intimidate a force of nature. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of revelation. Reed looked at his surviving men, their faces turned toward Sharma, their expressions a mix of disbelief and burgeoning reverence. He looked at the wreckage of the convoy, the bodies of the enemy fighters still visible on the ridge, and finally, back at the woman standing before him. The logistics sergeant was gone. Only Spectre remained. Later that day, back at the FOB, the atmosphere had undergone a seismic shift. The story had spread like wildfire, whispered in corners of the motor pool, in the chow hall, in the hushed confines of the barracks. The logistics NCO who had taken down Corporal Davis with a single throw was the same woman who had dismantled a complex ambush by herself. She was Spectre. The mockery and dismissal that had followed Sharma like a shadow had vanished. In its place was a wide, respectful berth. Soldiers would fall silent when she entered a room. They would subtly straighten their posture, their eyes following her with a sense of profound awe. They were in the presence of something they couldn't fully comprehend, but they knew with instinctual certainty that it was worthy of their deepest respect. Davis, his arm in a sling, his face a patchwork of bruises and shame, found her near the helipad. She was overseeing the loading of her specialized equipment onto a waiting helicopter, her departure as quiet and sudden as her arrival. He walked up to her, his steps hesitant. The entire FOB seemed to be holding its breath, watching. She turned to face him, her expression neutral. She wasn't angry. She wasn't triumphant. She was simply present. Davis opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. What could he say? Sorry I assaulted you? Sorry I completely misjudged you? Sorry I'm an arrogant fool who almost got himself and everyone else killed? The inadequacy of any apology was suffocating. So he did the only thing he could. He snapped his body to the most rigid position of attention he had ever held. He brought his hand up in a salute so sharp, so precise. It was a work of art. It was more than just a gesture of military courtesy. It was an act of contrition. It was an admission of his own failure and a profound acknowledgement of her superiority. It was the purest form of respect he was capable of giving. Sharma held his gaze for a long moment. Then, she gave him a short, almost imperceptible nod. It was an acceptance, an absolution. She didn't return the salute. That wasn't the protocol of their differing worlds. But the gesture was understood. As Davis lowered his hand, other soldiers nearby began to follow his lead. First Chen, then Rodriguez, then the others who had survived the convoy. Soon, a silent, unprompted wave of salutes spread across the tarmac. It was a spontaneous tribute, a collective apology from the men whose lives she had saved, whose world she had turned upside down. Colonel Reed approached last. The arrogance had been stripped from him, leaving behind a humbled, weary commander. He stopped a few feet from her, the setting sun casting their long shadows across the concrete. Your assessment, Spectre? He asked, his voice quiet, using her call sign for the first time. It was a concession of his authority, an acknowledgement of hers. The men are good soldiers, Sharma said, her voice as even as ever. They have courage, but they follow a chain of command that is more concerned with pride than with preparation. You underestimated an asset, and you used your soldiers' lives as a tool for punishment. The ambush was inevitable. The casualties were not. Her words were not an attack. They were a clinical, dispassionate after-action report. The truth, laid bare and stripped of emotion, was more devastating than any shouted accusation could have been. She did not gloat or rub his nose in his failure. She simply stated the facts. That, more than anything, was what earned his final, grudging measure of respect. I see, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The report will reflect that. I know, she replied. She turned without another word and boarded the helicopter. As it lifted off, kicking up a storm of dust and grit, Reed and his men stood watching, a silent assembly of the humbled, until it was just a dark speck disappearing into the twilight. Night fell, deep and star-dusted, over the mountains of Afghanistan. FOB Black Ridge was quiet, but it was a changed quiet. The usual boisterous energy was gone, replaced by a more somber, reflective mood. In the motor pool, under the lonely glare of a single work light, Anya Sharma sat on a metal stool. The helicopter had not taken her away. It had merely been a decoy, taking her gear while she remained behind, her work not quite finished. She was meticulously cleaning the 417 Hong Kong dollars. It was a ritual, a form of meditation. Her hands, steady and sure, moved with a practiced, intimate knowledge of the weapon. She broke it down into its core components, each piece laid out in perfect order on a clean cloth. The bolt carrier group, the trigger assembly, the finely machined barrel. The smell of carbon solvent and gun oil hung in the air, a sharp, clean scent that cut through the ever-present dust. The rhythmic scrape of the cleaning rod, the soft click of metal parts fitting together, the gentle wipe of an oiled rag. These were the sounds of her world. This was her church. Here, there were no politics, no egos, no misjudgments. There was only the perfect, reliable mechanics of a tool and the skill of the woman who wielded it. The weapon was an extension of her will, and she cared for it with a respect she rarely afforded to people. She worked in silence, her focus absolute. The events of the day, the confrontation in the bar, the condescension from the colonel, the fire and terror of the ambush, were compartmentalized, filed away, analyzed, and learned from. She did not dwell on the emotions of it. She dwelled on the tactics, the timing, the minute details that separated success from failure, life from death. A shadow fell over her workbench. She didn't startle, didn't even look up immediately. She had heard him coming from 50 yards away, his footsteps heavy and hesitant on the gravel. Colonel Reed stood there, holding 2 steaming ceramic mugs. He didn't speak for a long time, simply watching her hands as she reassembled the rifle's bolt with the precision of a watchmaker. The anger and humiliation of the day had settled into a weary acceptance. Finally, he stepped forward and placed one of the mugs on the edge of her workbench, next to a row of gleaming, perfectly cleaned cartridges. It was coffee, black and strong. "Figured you could use this, Sergeant," he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of all its former bluster. He used her cover rank deliberately. It was a sign that he understood the rules of her world, a world of shadows and assumed identities. He was acknowledging the game and his place in it. Sharma paused in her work. She looked at the mug, then up at him. Her eyes, in the harsh light of the work lamp, were deep and difficult to read. She picked up the mug, her fingers wrapping around its warmth. "Thanks, Colonel," she said. Her voice was just as quiet. It was an acceptance of the truce, a closing of the circle. Reed gave a short, stiff nod. There was nothing more to say. His career was likely over, or at least permanently stalled. He would be known as the commander who had to be saved by the operator he had tried to break. But in that moment, it didn't seem to matter as much as this small, quiet gesture of reconciliation. He had failed as a commander, but he could still act as a man. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone with her rifle and her coffee. The sound of his footsteps faded, and the motor pool was silent again, save for the distant hum of a generator and the soft sounds of Sharma's work. She took a slow sip of the coffee. It was hot and bitter. She looked down at the rifle, now fully reassembled, its dark, matte finish absorbing the light. It was a beautiful and terrible thing, an instrument of precise, final judgment, a tool for a Spectre. She picked up a soft cloth and began to wipe it down one last time, her movements slow and deliberate. As her hands moved over the cold steel, the first faint hint of dawn began to touch the highest peaks on the eastern horizon, outlining the jagged silhouette of the mountains she had conquered. The long night at FOB Black Ridge was ending, and a new, more respectful day was beginning.